Mr. Michael Dockry will be presenting on what is a forest management plan and its importance. Mr. Dockry, or Mike as we call him here, is the perfect individual for presenting on this topic due to his extensive knowledge and experience with forest management plans and their development. Mike came to us as the USDA Forest Service Liaison with the College of Menominee Nation in March of 2005. So his office is on the second floor of the college here. He represents 5 different units of the U.S. Forest Service. They are, of course, Madison's Forest Products Lab, the North Central Research Station located in St. Paul, the Northeast Research Station, and the Northeast Area State and Private Forestry Unit, both of which are located in Newtown Square, Pennsylvania, and Region 9 of the National Forest Service, which extends from Wisconsin, the northern states of Wisconsin, over to the Atlantic, with their headquarters in Milwaukee. Originally from Green Bay, after high school, Mike entered and earned his bachelor's at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. It was in forest science with a certificate in environmental studies. He went on to Penn State University where he earned his master's in forest resources that had a primary focus on forest ecology. Mike has worked as an environmental planning intern for the United Tribe in Wisconsin in 1997. This was just before he volunteered for the Peace Corps. And in the Peace Corps, he served 3 years in Bolivia, where he worked on soil conservation, reforestation, and environmental education projects with a Bolivian university and a small Andean community for 2 years. He spent 1 year working on community development and natural resource planning in the Bolivian national parks and the tropics of the Amazon River Valley. He has also served as a natural resource manager and ecologist in La Paz, Bolivia, a forestry specialist for USDA in Washington, D.C., a national resource manager and ecologist in California, a forest planner in Rio Grande, Puerto Rico, and before coming to CMN, he was the assistant forest planner for the Green Mountain and Finger Lakes National Forest, in which he worked with the Seneca and the Cayuga tribal nations. He worked there to facilitate dialogue between the public, between the research scientists and the Forest Service managers to create an integrated and sustainable forest plan. Mike is a scholar, having published numerous works on various aspects of forestry and forest management. He speaks 3 other languages, Spanish, Portuguese, and Quechua, an Andean language. He is an enrolled member of the Menominee Nation of Oklahoma. He and his wife will make their home in Shawn, have a young 7-month-old baby boy. So I'm very pleased and privileged to present to you Mr. Michael Dockry.
Thank you. That was a very nice introduction. Well, let's see if I can live up to the expectation here after that intro. So tonight, really we want to talk about management plans. And I have a few goals that I thought for this evening. One is to really just raise the awareness of forest planning, the importance of it, to provide an overview of forest plans, what's contained in forest plans, how are they developed, and then finally discuss a little bit why these forest plans are important. And also I would like to have fun learning from each other. And we've developed a little activity afterwards, after my presentation, to work together, learn, and kind of have some fun. Before I start though, here's the agenda. I'm going to talk for about 30 minutes, going through the reasons for the workshop, introduction to forest plans, talk about parts of the forest plan, and then why are forest plans important. And then we'll break up into smaller groups and do an exercise for about 60 minutes. After we're done working in a group, then we'll have one person from each group kind of share with the rest of us what they worked on. Before I dive in, I'd like to talk a little bit about, as Dr. Fowler said, this is our first educational activity between the partnership between the Forest Service and College of Menominee Nation. Our center, we basically set up a center called Center for First Americans Forest Lands. The real vision for this center was to create a world-class sustainable forestry research and education center, really to try to combine the Menominee sensibilities and expertise in silviculture with some of the Forest Service expertise in ecology and wood products utilization. And we really want to benefit, the vision is to benefit a wide variety of stakeholders, different groups of people. The mission for the Center for First Americans Forest Lands is really to synthesize the best practices of forest ecology, utilization, American Indian expertise, and then apply this to sustainable forestry practices and sustainable development. The overall goal for the center is to promote sustainable forestry management practices through research, education, policy analysis, and technical assistance. And as I said, we wanted to really work with a wide variety of stakeholders or groups, including different tribes, reservations, and communities, especially those that are bordering national forest land, Native American forest and land managers, tribal colleges and universities, and finally the broad community of interest, or anyone that's interested in sustainable forestry. But why are we doing this workshop? Well, when I started in March, I think in June, a couple weeks after starting, I went to an intertribal timber council meeting and met a lot of different managers, tribal managers from all over the country. And there was a general discussion that we kept hearing and having over and over, that there was a need to increase sort of the awareness of forest management plans and forest management planning. I've also received specifically requests from people saying, hey, why don't we do some educational activities? The center that you're setting up is for education. Let's talk about forest management plans. As you saw in the mission and our goals, really education is one of them. So this helps us as a center to fulfill our mission to have this workshop. Finally, I think, and more importantly, is that the more we can understand what forest plans are, what forest management is, then we can really provide better input into our forest management plans. And that, in turn, leads to better forest management. Now I'm going to get into the actual content of the workshop, and this is forest management planning. And I see most of you have it, but the PowerPoint presentation is in that little workbook. So why is forest planning important? Here's a map of Wisconsin, and you can see the green on it. Basically, the green is forest. And you can see most of the state is covered in forest. Quite a bit, obviously, more in the northern part, but also in the southwest. And those forests are owned and managed by many different people. Private landowners comprise the largest owner and managers of the forest in Wisconsin, but there's also public agencies, tribes, private industry. So there's all these different people managing their forests. And forest planning is really important to see kind of how your forest land fits in the broader picture. Because as we know, ecological systems and forests don't know political boundaries. So to have a clear vision and goals on how you're managing really can give you an idea of how you're managing the forests altogether. And because all of these different forests are managed and owned by different entities, a lot of different people plan. A lot of different people have management plans. Private landowners might have a stewardship plan. Industrial forest owners have plans to manage their forests. Towns and cities, of course, tribes have forest plans. The states and federal governments as well. And these plans are all different, a little bit different. They have similarities, but they're all a little different depending on the entity that's managing that. So for example, forest land owned by a paper company probably is managed to provide trees that would then feed into their paper mills. And so they want to have high quality trees for that mill, and trees that will help them make the paper products that they're making. County forest land, the county forest managers are managing that forest for the county. So the public in that county really has to provide those forest managers with reasons or vision for how they want to see the forest managed and what products and what things they can do there. It might be hunting, recreation, camping. Federal forest land has even a broader public that they're working with. Basically anyone in the United States is a stakeholder for the federal forest land. So they're looking at all sorts of issues in terms of their management. And so on. Tribal forest land, that land is managed for the tribe. Small private landowners, they might manage it for their family. The similarity between all these different plans, whether they're focused on one goal or the other, is that they're all written in order to address issues or to satisfy different goals. Forest plans can address numbers and different issues and combinations of issues. These issues might be economic, social, there might be issues surrounding cultural and heritage sites, issues about wildlife and different species that you're trying to manage for, issues about water quality, road management, recreation. Almost anything important to the people that use and have ownership of the forest could be an issue that the forest management plan is set up to address. I wanted to take a moment here to talk a little bit about how forest plans and forest planning has been changing. I think we're entering into a new era of forest planning. Before, forest plans were very focused on specific outputs, things like timber, wildlife, producing certain habitats for certain wildlife species, water quality. Those were very tangible things that these plans were set up to manage for. Now, we're starting to understand more of the complexities of the natural system and the natural world. We're setting up our plans not only to look at these timber outputs, wildlife, water quality, but the complexity, the diversity. Our plans are being set up now for outputs like intact ecosystems, biodiversity. We're setting up forest plans to address various social issues. People are now looking to the forests for places to not only just go camping and recreate, but to have a sense of place, to maintain their place, and a place for spiritual rejuvenation. So we're looking at forests as more complex entities at this point. Management goals in the past were usually set up to address these outputs. So a goal might be harvest this amount of timber, produce this amount of habitat for certain wildlife species. Now our goals are more broad. They're getting more complex. A goal might be to manage for biodiversity, maintaining the diverse forest communities that we have. Goals might go to some of the social aspects that I've talked about.
Excuse me, Mike, you talked about those different aspects. Are you basically talking in integrated resource management plan? Are you talking in IRMP? And how prevalent is that in some of these other forest lines, whether it be county or federal or whatever? Because I know the tribe is looking at it, and other tribes are. How prevalent is that in under these other jurisdictions too?
I think that's a good question. And your plan can basically be set up to just deal with the forest, but as you know, there are a lot of other things that are integrated into a forest. So things like transportation planning might go into it, some of your general land use planning, looking at how your communities are growing and what kind of development you're doing. So a forest plan could be considered part of an integrated management plan, or it could be an integrated management plan. So there's really no one answer, I think, for that. One of the other things, getting back to this process, one of the things that's changing is the view of the forester. In the past, the forester was really the decision maker. They were the ones that they know the science, they know the technology, they know the outputs and how to manage for those. So they really wrote the plans and decided on how they were going to manage. Now we're starting to see a change where the forester is viewed more as an advisor, a facilitator trying to work with the public to develop visions for the forest, to develop goals for the management, and then using their specific expertise and their scientific knowledge to set up and design a plan that can achieve those goals and visions that the public has. I think, too, the forester's role now in this is to set up kind of sideboards and to really bring that science to the table, to work with the public so that the vision is a realistic vision. For example, I might move to Arizona and want to have white pine trees all over my yard or all over that county forest. That forester would really need to talk to me and explain that white pine doesn't grow there, it's not native to that area, and it would be very difficult to do that. The same thing here, where the foresters really need to communicate their expertise to the public. This kind of gets to your question. Timelines on forest plans vary. Some of the federal forests, they're dealing with millions of acres, millions of people, really. And those planning processes many times take 4, 5, 6, even up to 10 years to develop a forest plan. The issues are very complex, and there are a lot of people that really need to be involved in that process. The process is a little different in some places. A private landowner might just sit down with a consulting forester and really sketch out some goals that they want to manage for. Or, like I said, a federal forest might be having a process that lasts for years where you're trying to get as much public input and scientific input into the process as possible. Scientific information, again, that varies, but you want a management plan that's really based in science. So in order to bring in scientific information into your management plan, you need to take some time to really investigate that and work with the scientists. As I said, the tribal and public roles in land management planning are changing, that it's really up to the foresters and the public to work together to develop these management plans, to develop a vision and goals for the management of forests. And finally, regulations. There's different regulations for private landowners, tribal land, federal land, state and county land, and all those really need to be factored into the planning process. Some of those regulations might make you do certain analysis or collect certain scientific information or to involve certain members of the public, but those regulations are a little bit different for each entity. So now I'm going to go into kind of talking about a typical process and a typical plan. These are just general. Most management plans contain all these elements and go through this process. Again, I said some are a little different, but I think this is really boils it down to the core, some of the core issues here in a forest management plan. I'm going to go through all this right now, starting with information gathering. The first step usually is to gather up a lot of information, to see what you have. That mini maps, where is the property, what are adjacent lands, soil maps, and also vegetation maps. A lot of maps go into planning usually. Information is gathered on, maybe there were some studies done in that particular area. Maybe studies have been done on particular species that you would like to manage for. So those are all gathered up. Soil information, I've mentioned not only the maps, but the soil descriptions, what kind of trees and plants grow on different soil types. What vegetation is out there, the inventory, what do you have? How old is it? Is it regenerating? What species are there? And then what are the trends in that? So not only what do we have today, but what did we have yesterday, 10 years ago, 50 years ago, and what will we have tomorrow if those trends continue? You might have some species of trees and habitats that 50 years ago you had a lot of, today maybe a moderate amount, and in another 50 years you might have very little. So that's a trend. So it's really important to look at the vegetation and where things are going. That's another piece of information.
What causes that?
Excuse me?
The deterioration of species. What causes that?
Different causes. There may be insects or disease. There may be a wind event, maybe management activities. And I think the other thing that's important that I always think is interesting is to try to find other plans. Maybe plans that you've had for that particular forest to see what's been working, what hasn't been working, but also plans from surrounding lands, or maybe plans from the state or national level. Again, that kind of lets you see how you fit into the larger landscape and the larger picture. The next step is usually after you have a lot of information, people look over it. The next step is to really create a vision for that forest. And these activities are usually done collaboratively. So at this point, it's usually people come together from all different viewpoints with the forest managers, with the scientists, really talk about what is their vision for the forest. This vision then forms the basis for the rest of the plan. It doesn't have to be complicated. It can be very simple, in fact. Usually it's a narrative statement about some future condition that you'd like to see, the future forest. So here's an example of a vision statement I took out of the Wisconsin statewide forest plan. So their vision was to work in partnership to protect and sustainably manage Wisconsin's public and private forest lands to ensure ecological, economic, and social benefits of these forests for the citizens of Wisconsin now and into the future. That's a very concise statement. There's a lot of stuff in that vision. As the management plan progresses, everything in that plan really will be pointing to that vision because that's what you want to manage for. I'm moving through the parts of the forest plan and sort of the process. I talked about information gathering, creating a vision. Now I'm going to talk about goals and objectives, which is kind of the next step or the next part of a typical forest plan. And I think the visioning and the goals and objectives, that's the part where we try to get as much public involvement as possible to bring in the viewpoints, because that's a very general conceptual piece, not technical. You don't have to be a scientist. So goals are important really because they identify different areas of emphasis that you're going to try to manage for. They really help the forest management achieve that vision that you laid out in the beginning. And again, just like the vision, the goals kind of come under the vision, objectives come underneath goals. So it forms the basis for different objectives. A goal is really a concise statement of desired future conditions. It's really broad and general. There's no dates on it. There's no timeline set to these things. They're timeless. It really provides or creates a blueprint for the forest plan. Now, here's an example of a goal. A goal might be to maintain long-term soil productivity, maintain the soil quality. What is an objective? Again, I said objectives came underneath the goals. So these two are concise statements. They're timeless. They don't have timelines attached to them. But the difference is that they have measurable results. Like I said, they respond to the goals. They come underneath the goal. So for example, the goal that we used in the example, maintain long-term soil productivity, might have different objectives. One might be to minimize soil erosion, nutrient loss, and compaction. And those are things you can measure. You can go out and say, how much soil is eroding? How much compaction is actually happening? Another objective might be to restore and revegetate disturbed areas. Again, you can measure how much disturbed area was there or is there, how much revegetation happened. It's something that's measurable. The plan now at this point, after doing the visioning, after deciding on some goals and objectives, starts to get more specific. A lot of times they develop maps and different management areas, and I'll talk about that right now. This is a point where the public involvement is probably less than the scientists and than the forest managers, because it's starting to get into some more technical areas of forestry. A management area is, simply put, a place or an area on the forest with different or similar management objectives, management practices, and intensity of management. And again, I'm sort of building a list here, but these really help you achieve your goals and objectives, which in turn help achieve the vision that was laid out in the forest plan. So an example of an area that you might have on your forest, you might have an area that's basically zoned as hemlock and managed for continuous forest cover, okay? And I'll come back to that and talk a little bit more about that example. Management areas, I think, in other terms, you can think of them as forest zoning. It's like a county or a city zoning map. It describes this desired condition of the land, so you have different areas across the forest mapped out. It talks about different management emphasis. You might have one area that emphasizes certain wildlife habitat, another area that might be particularly good for timber harvesting. You might have that, and different areas. So there are different management emphasis. And they describe different uses that can happen within that. I think of it as sort of as a box of crayons. So if you had a blank map, a black and white map of your forest, and had different crayons, and each crayon was a different management emphasis area, you could color in the forest and then see that visually. Management areas are really important because, again, it makes a clear map of the forest. I know what's going to happen there because I can see that. You know what's going to happen there. The forest manager knows what's going to happen there. It allows us beforehand to really set up a variety of diverse habitats, different tree species, different ages of trees. It helps us to think about the goals and objectives and the issues that we're trying to address in the forest plan. It gives us a way to resolve some of those. And I think this is very important too. These management maps really help the forest managers know what to do where. This is the document that forest managers use on a day-to-day basis. So it's something that they really need to be clear on. So going back to this hemlock forest management area that I was talking about, you might have different management emphasis. You might want to manage this continuous forest to protect the scenic character of the area, to provide different recreational opportunities, to provide another habitat for wildlife, and high-quality timber. So there are all these different things that you could have. You could have different management areas with different species and different emphasis. This is just an example. And here's sort of a map that I put up, and you can see all the different colors. They would correspond to different management areas, different management intensities, different emphasis. Management plans then, moving from the visioning, the goals and objectives, to the management areas and the mapping, get pretty specific, and they move into some operational guidelines and scheduling. Operational guidelines are really the how-tos, the shall-dos and the shall-not-dos, and the schedules are basically orders of things that you're doing. So for example, management guidelines, and these are just examples that I made up. But a private landowner might have in their management plan a guideline that says, follow Wisconsin's best management practices. So they know that any management activity that they're doing really should be following those best management practices. You might have things that say, don't harvest trees within certain areas, or maintain certain species of trees for wildlife. Activity schedules too, then the plan gets specific and basically talks about what kind of things are you going to do, what management activities, how much, and when. So for example, you might talk about rebuilding roads. How much? How often? How much timber are you going to harvest? How many trees are you going to plant? And this too, along with that management area mapping, really provides the managers with it helps them do their day-to-day job. It gives them their daily work schedule, basically, or their yearly work schedule. And finally, going through all the plan, another important piece is monitoring and evaluation. And this is a really important piece of the plan because it lets you know if the vision and goals that you've set up are actually being accomplished. Monitoring is simply the collection of information that can be used to reflect resource changes. Evaluation is the interpretation of that information. So you're basically collecting information, analyzing it, and looking at that and seeing how your goals and objectives are being accomplished. With all the different kinds of plans we have, the private plans, tribal plans, federal plans, different people do the monitoring and evaluation. Scientists can do it. The forest managers might be doing it. The individual landowner might do it. And the public might do it. And there might be a combination of all those groups doing it together. How often that things are monitored and evaluated really depends on the forest plan and sort of the resource that you're monitoring. If you're looking at tree species that live 200 years, your monitoring schedule will be different than if you're maybe looking at an insect or a butterfly that might only live a year or two. And why is this part of the forest plan important? Again, it really lets you see if your management activities are achieving the goals and the vision that you set out in the beginning. It's a tool to be used to say, hey, wait a minute, we might need to change something. Our vision or goals are not being achieved. We might need to adjust the plan. So it helps you really make sure that the management plan is staying current. So going back to our example that I had for goals and objectives, we might ask for a monitoring question, have our objectives been obtained? Have we minimized soil erosion in that example? Furthermore, we can ask, are these objectives helping us achieve our goal? If our goal was to maintain soil productivity, are these things really helping us? And if they're not, what changes could be made in our management or in the management plan to help us really achieve those goals and vision that we set out? This slide is kind of one of the goals of this meeting. Why is this important? It's really important because the forest management plan gives a roadmap on how you're going to achieve certain goals. How are you going to achieve a vision for the forest? It's really an opportunity, land management planning, forest planning is an opportunity to get public and tribal input into the planning process, into that plan, developing that vision. It reinforces our tie to the forest. Even if we're not foresters, it helps us become involved and stay involved with the management. Also, importantly, these management plans provide guidance to the forest managers. The people that are out there every day need that for their guidance to make sure that they're doing what they should be doing. It helps promote healthy forest ecosystems. And I think in turn, a good management plan really helps promote sustainable management, which I believe is a goal that we all would like to see. There are some challenges, as probably all of you know. It's very difficult to incorporate into a management plan different points of view. This information is complex. There's a lot of science, and as I said, we're moving away from just the output-based forest plans to more complex plans. So we're looking at science, we're looking at nature in a different way. It's very difficult to monitor sometimes. You don't know maybe what to monitor. It's hard to tell sometimes if what you're monitoring is really what you should be monitoring to see if you're achieving goals and objectives. And of course, time and money. It takes time to work with the public. It takes time to get the scientific information together. It takes money. I think that there's hope. I think these challenges can be overcome. And that's really working together with the scientists, with the forest managers, and with the public and tribal members to create this common vision.